In December 1992, a homeless Vietnam veteran named Daniel Cooper asked Clint Eastwood for $5 outside a grocery store in Carmel, California. What Clint did instead of giving him money and what happened over the next 7 years became one of those stories about how sometimes the best way to help someone isn't giving them what they ask for, but giving them what they actually need. Daniel Cooper was 47 years old in 1992, living in his car in Carmel. He'd been homeless for 3 years, though if you asked him, he'd say he was between situations because admitting homelessness felt like admitting defeat. Daniel had served in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970 with the 101st Airborne. He'd come home to a country that didn't want to hear about the war, couldn't find work that paid enough to support a family, watched his marriage fall apart, and slowly slid from struggling to surviving to barely holding on. By 1989, he'd lost his apartment. By 1990, he was living in his car. By 1992, he'd been stuck in that cycle for so long he'd almost forgotten what normal life felt like. He wasn't one of the aggressive panhandlers. He'd stand near the grocery store, sometimes hold a cardboard sign that said, "Veteran, anything helps." Most days he made enough for food. Some days he didn't. Clint Eastwood lived in Carmel. He'd been mayor of the town from 1986 to 1988. He still lived there, still shopped at the local stores, still moved through town like a regular resident, despite being one of the most famous people in the world. On a Saturday morning in early December 1992, Clint was coming out of Nielsen Bros Market with 2 bags of groceries when Daniel approached him. Daniel had seen Clint before. Everyone in Carmel knew who Clint Eastwood was, but Daniel had never approached him. Something about asking a celebrity for money felt different than asking regular people. But it was cold. Daniel hadn't eaten in 2 days. His pride was losing the argument with his hunger. "Excuse me, sir," Daniel said, his voice quiet. "Could you spare $5? Clint stopped, looked at Daniel, saw the worn military jacket, the cardboard sign leaning against the storefront, the car in the parking lot that was clearly being lived in. "You a veteran?" Clint asked. "Yes, sir, 101st Airborne, Vietnam." "What do you need the $5 for?" Daniel hesitated. Most people didn't ask. They either gave money or they didn't. "Food, sir." Clint set his grocery bags down. "When's the last time you ate?" "Thursday." It was Saturday. 2 days without food. "Come with me," Clint said, picking up his bags and walking toward his truck. Daniel followed, uncertain. Clint loaded his groceries into the truck, then turned to Daniel. "Get in. We're going to get you some food." They drove to a diner on the edge of town. Clint walked in like he owned the place, which he almost did, being a regular for years. They sat in a booth. Clint ordered coffee, told Daniel to order whatever he wanted. Daniel ordered carefully. Eggs, toast, hash browns, not the most expensive thing on the menu, still trying to preserve some dignity. While they waited for food, Clint asked questions. "Where'd you serve? What'd you do after? How'd you end up here?" Daniel told him the whole story. 2 years in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne, came home in 1970 to a country that treated Vietnam vets like they'd done something wrong just by serving, tried construction work, but the economy was bad and jobs were scarce. Got married young, had a daughter, but the marriage couldn't survive. The combination of PTSD he wouldn't admit he had and money problems he couldn't solve. Divorce in 1978, lost contact with his daughter, bounced between jobs for the next decade, construction, warehouse work, whatever he could find. Each job lasted less time than the one before. Started drinking too much. Lost his last regular job in 1987. Spent 2 years barely hanging on, then lost his apartment in 1989. Been living in his car since then, watching years pass while he tried to figure out how to climb back up. He didn't make excuses, didn't blame anyone, just stated facts in the flat tone of someone who'd told this story to themselves so many times it didn't even hurt anymore. You got any skills? Clint asked. What'd you do before the war? Construction, carpentry. I'm pretty good with my hands, but nobody's hiring a guy who lives in his car. Why not? No address, no phone number, no way for them to reach me. And I looked like, Daniel gestured to himself, unshaven, worn clothes, the visible markers of homelessness. The food came. Daniel ate slowly, trying not to look desperate even though he was starving. Clint watched him for a moment, then said, I've got some property that needs work. Fencing, some deck repairs, nothing fancy. You interested? Daniel looked up from his food. You offering me a job? I'm offering you work. You do good work, there's more of it. You do bad work, there isn't. Fair? More than fair. When do you want me to start? Monday. But here's the deal. You can't show up looking like you're living in your car. You need to be clean, rested, and ready to work. Can you do that? Daniel's face fell slightly. I don't have anywhere to shower, and I don't have work clothes that aren't falling apart. Clint pulled out his wallet. He handed Daniel $200. There's a motel on Highway 1. Get a room for the week. Clean yourself up. Get some work clothes. Monday morning, 7 a.m. Meet me here. We'll go to the property together. Daniel stared at the money. I can't pay you back right away. I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm asking you to show up Monday and work. That's the payment. Daniel took the money with shaking hands. Why are you doing this? Because you asked for $5 for food, and I'm betting you haven't asked for much help in your life. That tells me you're not looking for a handout. You're looking for a way forward. So I'm giving you one. That weekend, Daniel got a motel room at the place Clint had suggested. The clerk looked at him. Skeptically disheveled guy paying cash for a week in advance looked like trouble. But Daniel's money was good and the room was his. He showered for the first time in weeks, really showered, not just the hurried washing up he did in gas station bathrooms when he could. He stood under hot water for 20 minutes, washing away not just dirt, but some of the shame and despair that had built up over 3 years. He washed his clothes in the bathtub, bought some cheap work pants and shirts at a thrift store, nothing fancy, but clean and functional, shaved in a real mirror with real light, looked at himself and saw someone who might actually be capable of working again. He slept in a real bed for the first time in 3 years. Woke up the next morning, not cramped and cold, but rested. Almost forgot for a moment where he was, what his life had become, then remembered and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope that maybe things could change. Monday morning, 7 a.m., he was at the diner. Clint was already there, drinking coffee. They drove to a property Clint owned in the hills outside Carmel. There was fencing that needed repair and a deck that needed rebuilding. You know how to do this? Clint asked. Daniel walked the fence line, checked the deck structure. Yeah, I know how to do this. Materials are in the shed. Tools, too. Work at your own pace, but do it right. I'll check on you later. Clint left. Daniel worked. He worked like a man who'd been given something precious and wasn't going to waste it. He repaired the fence properly, not just making it stand, but making it strong. He rebuilt the deck with care, checking every board, every nail. Clint came back late afternoon, looked at the work, didn't say much, just nodded. Tomorrow, same time, there's more fencing on the north side. They fell into a routine. Daniel would meet Clint at the diner in the morning. They'd drive to whatever property needed work. Daniel would work all day. Clint would pay him in cash at the end of each week. After the first week, Clint said, "The motel's expensive. I've got a small cottage on one of my properties. Needs some work, but it's livable. You can stay there, rent-free for now. Fix it up in your spare time." Daniel moved into the cottage. It was small, one room, bathroom, kitchen area, but it had 4 walls and a roof, and it was his. Over the next 3 months, Daniel worked on Clint's properties: fencing, deck repair, some roofing, painting, whatever needed doing. But something else was happening too. Clint wasn't just giving Daniel work. He was giving him structure, purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. They'd talk while working about Vietnam, about coming home, about the difficulty of readjusting. Clint had served in the Army during the Korean War era, though he'd never seen combat. But he understood the difficulty of transition. The problem, Clint said one day while they were working on a fence, isn't that you can't do the work. You're damn good at this. The problem is nobody gave you a chance to show you could still do it. In March 1993, Clint had a different conversation with Daniel. "I'm starting a small property management company, maintaining my properties and maybe taking on some other clients who need groundskeeping and repair work. I need someone to run it. You interested?" Daniel looked at him. "Run it? I've been homeless for 3 years. I'm not qualified to run anything. You're sober, you're reliable, you show up every day and do good work. You're more qualified than most people. The question is whether you want to do it." Daniel thought about it. Running a business, even a small one, felt impossible. But 3 months ago, having a roof over his head had felt impossible too. "Yeah," he said finally, "I want to do it." Clint set it up, Cooper Property Services. Daniel was the manager. Clint provided the startup capital, the initial clients, the equipment. At first, it was just Daniel doing the work. But as word spread that Clint Eastwood's property manager did good work, other clients started calling. By summer, Daniel needed help. He hired 2 people, both veterans, both struggling to find work. By 1994, Cooper Property Services had 8 employees and 30 regular clients in Carmel and the surrounding area. Daniel had business cards printed, got a separate business phone line, hired a part-time bookkeeper to handle the paperwork he'd been doing himself, started thinking of himself as a business owner instead of just a guy doing odd jobs. The work was steady, the clients were happy, the employees were reliable. Daniel was making real money for the first time since the 1980s. By 1995, Daniel had saved enough money to buy a small house, a modest 2-bedroom place in a working-class neighborhood in Seaside. Nothing fancy, but he got a mortgage like a regular person, had credit again, had an address that wasn't a motel or someone else's property. He moved out of Clint's cottage and into his own place for the first time in 6 years, stood in his empty living room the first night and cried, not from sadness, from the overwhelming relief of having made it back from a place he thought he'd never escape. In 1997, 5 years after asking for $5, Daniel was managing a successful small business with 15 employees and annual revenue over $400,000. But something else happened during those years that mattered more than the business success. Daniel started noticing other homeless veterans in Carmel. He'd see them panhandling, living in cars, stuck in the same cycle he'd been trapped in. He started offering them work. day labor at first. If they showed up and did the job, he'd offer more. If they needed a place to stay, he'd work something out. By 1998, Cooper Property Services had hired 23 veterans who'd been homeless or on the edge of homelessness. Not all of them worked out. Some couldn't handle the structure or couldn't stay sober, but more than half did, found stability, got back on their feet. In 1999, Daniel was invited to speak at a Veterans Services Conference in San Francisco. 200 people in the audience, social workers, VA administrators, nonprofit directors, people who worked with homeless veterans every day. Daniel stood at the podium in a suit he'd bought specifically for this speech. 7 years earlier, he'd been living in his car. Now he was addressing a conference about veteran homelessness. He told his story about living in his car in Carmel, about the slow erosion of dignity that comes with homelessness, about asking Clint Eastwood for $5 outside a grocery store, about what Clint did. Instead of just handing him money, he could have given me $5. Daniel said, his voice steady, I'd have eaten that day and been back asking for $5 more the next day. That's how homelessness works. You're constantly solving the immediate crisis, but never escaping the cycle. Instead, he gave me work, gave me structure, gave me a reason to believe I could still contribute something. That's what broke the cycle. That's what changed my life. Not charity, opportunity. Clint was in the audience. Daniel hadn't known he was coming. After the speech, they talked. You've done something remarkable, Clint said. You took what I gave you and multiplied it. 23 veterans employed. That's not me. That's you. I couldn't have done it without that first chance you gave me. Maybe, but I've given chances to plenty of people over the years. Not all of them did what you did with it. You built something. You gave other people the same chance you got. That's on you. In 2002, 10 years after asking for $5, Daniel was profiled in the Monterey County Herald. The article detailed his business, his work with homeless veterans, and how Clint Eastwood's decision to offer work instead of money had started it all. The article caught the attention of larger veterans organizations. Daniel started getting invited to speak about employment as a pathway out of homelessness for veterans. In 2005, he received a commendation from the California Department of Veterans Affairs for his work in veteran employment. Cooper Property Services is still operating today. Daniel is semi-retired now, but the company he built continues to prioritize hiring veterans, particularly those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Over 30 years, the company has employed more than 150 veterans, helping them transition from homelessness to stable employment. Here's what that December morning in 1992 teaches us. Daniel asked for $5 because that's what he thought he needed. Immediate relief from immediate hunger. Clint saw something different. He saw a skilled worker who'd been broken by circumstances but wasn't broken in character. He saw someone who needed opportunity more than charity. The $5 would have solved Daniel's problem for a day. The job solved it for a lifetime. And more than that, it gave Daniel the tools to solve it for others. That's the lesson. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do isn't giving people what they ask for. It's giving them what they actually need. A chance. Structure. The dignity of earning instead of receiving. Daniel didn't need a handout. He needed a hand up. Clint saw the difference. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that the best help often doesn't look like help at all. It looks like an opportunity and a challenge to rise to it.